All right, it's 11:30. We'll start the meeting for the budget hearing for the Bureau of Administrative Adjudication. I'm glad we've settled on a name. That can be the #1 accomplishment for the previous year.
Municipal Violations Bureau.
No, it's that Bureau of Administrative Adjudication. We're going to call it BAHA. Welcome to Councilor Driscoll, Councilor Green, Councilor Lovejoy Grinnell. I'm Councilor Rudd, Councilor Bay, Councilor Allen. We have Leah Whitmer and Dave Delvecchio here. So, Leah, would you like to introduce the Bureau of Administrative Adjudication? You've been here for 8 months, so you can give us a little bit into the 8 months, what you've accomplished, where we're going, and how it relates to your budget.
Sure. So I have been here for 8 months. When I got here, I started reviewing the law, the state and local law, and other applicable laws that are relevant. Develop relationship with different city departments. I interact regularly with finance, obviously, law, MBD codes, treasury. I observed and did outreach to other bureaus of administrative adjudication and administrative agencies across the state. I went to Buffalo and Rochester. I spoke with Yonkers, and I did some observations of other state agencies. We did a space build out, so we're in City Hall Commons, room 701. We made that 2 separate offices and made public access over there. We developed the hearing room that's right down the hall, and we'll have that equipped with recording capabilities by the time we're ready to start doing hearings. We furnished the whole thing. We've supplies, all the office equipment, all the hearing equipment. We did an administrative build out, so we developed all the internal processes for the BAA and how we interact with other departments. So the primary departments we'll interact with will be codes, because they will be handling the actual ticketing, and treasury, who will be handling the collection of all of our payments. We created all the documents, so we're going to use everything from the ticket to the payment slips and everything in between. We've developed rules and regulations and policies and procedures for every step of the way. We've built out an extensive FAQ that will be linked off of the webpage when that goes live, hopefully very shortly. We've also done a software build out. So when I started, the I-team had done outreach to a couple of companies that we did demos with for software. While the companies were fairly built out on the code side, they weren't on the adjudicative side. It's a relatively new concept across the state. The other cities we observed have all internally built out. So we started building out IPS and simultaneously did a joint RFP with codes to try and find new software. We only got 1 proposal in for that. So we're still exploring those options while finishing up the IPS build out, and we're also sitting in on the water department's computerized maintenance management system software demos coming up in like a week and a half to see if those could possibly better function for our capabilities. I think, as everybody's aware, IPS has limitations, especially when you try and add in an adjudicative process to that. So we're doing the best with what we have for now. We're fully staffed, so I have a full-time paralegal who's the other full-time employee that you can see in the budget. It was originally slated, I think, last year as a clerk and a secretary. We changed it to a paralegal so that they have the capabilities of the legal components to that position. And I also have 4 part-time administrative law judges that are in the temporary services line. I have 1 that will assist with hearings at about 20 hours a week, and then I have 3 that will form the appeals panel. I think they're in there. As 6 hours a month. It's really 2 hours a month times 3. So that's how it gets to the 6 hours a month. And I anticipate convening that panel quarterly as needed. So obviously right now we have dates scheduled August and then every other quarter. If we don't need it, if we don't have any appeals, we won't convene it, but I have it scheduled. It's hard to get 3 attorneys in the room, plus I have myself and the other hearing ALJ scheduled in case there's a conflict or an emergency with one of the other ones. So all 5 of us are scheduled for each of those, and then we'll convene as necessary. Based on the other cities that I observed, they all have under a 10% appeal rate. So just like everything else with this bureau, I think we'll have to wait and see how many hearings we get, how many of those hearings request an appeal. In order to appeal, you have to have pled not guilty to the underlying ticket, and then if you don't like the determination from the ALJ at the hearing, you have 30 days to appeal. what else? We did extensive staff and city training. So we did a full afternoon training for all of the part-time administrative law judges. We did a training for codes on how, with their inspectors as well as their supervisors, how the process is going to work. This is not going to alter the existing code process. It'll be an additional step. So instead of referring a case to the law department, they'll refer the case to the BAA by generating a ticket with a corresponding inspector affidavit. So we did a training on that. We also did a training for Treasury on the new collection of payments, because that'll be a new step for them to collect these payments there. So all of our plea forms will go through Treasury, whether there's a payment or not, and then Treasury will collect it, enter it into their software, and then kick it to us to enter it into IPS and process on our end. And finally, we've done extensive community outreach over the past couple of months. I know several of the counselors here have seen my presentation at different TNT groups. We've also done it to local landlord, tenant, real estate groups. We participated in the city's Housing Stability Press event a couple weeks ago. I've done several interviews with press and media groups. We changed the language on all the codes documents so that property owners that are getting notices or letter from codes know that the case has the potential to be referred to the BAA, whereas previously it just had language that it could be referred to the law department. We mailed about just under 6,000 postcards to all of the landlords in the city of Syracuse, advising them of the BAA, that it was getting up and running, that they should connect with codes regarding any outstanding codes violation, and showing them the fine and penalty schedule. And we've also produced informational brochures that we've been handing out anywhere we go. And like I said, at some point, the webpage will be linked off of finance for now, once the BAA is added to that. So that's kind of, the accomplishments that we've had over the past 8 months since I've been there. And then, moving forward, some of you are aware, but we started with, what I'll call a pilot, a batch of rental registry properties. That's where we're starting with ticketing. It's around 550 properties, give or take. Codes issued notices, just letters to them saying, hey, your time to register is up, back in June, July of 2018. For those that didn't comply, a couple weeks ago, Codes started issuing the notice of violation letters. Codes gave a 30-day comply by date. Typically, it's a 21-day comply by date, but Codes gave them a little extra time since this is the first round of ticketing that we're doing. I think they've generally had higher than anticipated compliance. The compliance is still trickling in, and we're working to get up and running and start ticketing those. We've had a few IPS glitches in the past week and a half, but we're optimistic that we should have the tickets out in the very near future. Once those tickets are out, the property owner has 30 days to plea, either pay, request a hearing, or if they do nothing, the ticket defaults and the amount automatically doubles on that 31st day. And then for those, regardless of how they plea, if they don't actually apply, right, so it's kind of confusing. You could plead guilty and pay, but you may not comply. So the wording there is a little off, but that's what the general municipal law outlines, the state legislation. So we would refer the case back to Codes, and Codes would have the ability to issue a second ticket at the higher fine amount. So we want to work through that process with this batch, and then once we've worked through that process, we anticipate fixing any issues that come up, and then at some point I'll say, okay, Ken, we're ready, go ahead. You can start, your inspectors can start ticketing for any new open violations. So new violations that come rolling in, while simultaneously working through the backlog of the rest of the rental registries, right? Because there's still thousands more rental registries that are non-compliant, and the other backlog. The only issue with any backlog is they're going to have to start the process over. So it's got to be a fresh case where there might be some issues with those if tenants have changed over and they still don't have the same access to the property. But for all new ones, and then as many of the backlog as they can, they'll start working through those. So that's kind of, the direction that we're going into, and, the goals that we have for the rest of 19 and 20.
Sounds good. Thank you. I have a couple questions, and then I'll open it to everybody else. But so first, we went through the Parking Violations Bureau a little earlier, and they had the revenue line on page 6. So I assume you have a corresponding revenue line on page 6. Is that fair? Is it the municipal violations receipts row? It's for.
If it's the same as, would it be the same as on my page 107, my activity indicators? No? Okay, I didn't get a page 6.
I suppose, yeah, 63.
63. Okay, yeah, so it is the same as
Yep,
the activity
yep.
indicators. Again, so this is an estimate to the best of my ability, and I discussed it with Ken. We anticipated 600 tickets. That is, just so I get the numbers right, 50 a month for 12 months. And then to get to the 63,000, what I did was I took a 30% dismissal reduction or waiver rate out of that 600, which pulled out 180 tickets and left 420 tickets. And then I did $150 per ticket to get you to the 63,000. The tickets could range from $50 to $1,200. That's the highest they could go for the subsequent defaulted tickets. So we said most people, you know, we're starting with the $50 ones right now, obviously, and then, you know, it could be a range, whether it's a first, second, or subsequent ticket. So we just picked 150. I think next year we'll have a much better number for you. That's kind of just the best guess estimate at this point.
And then, thank you. And then my other question is related to you talked about the 500 properties that are involved in this like initial target or
Sure.
outreach, whatever it may be. So how is that, where does that come from? Because when it's not using it's in no way targeting people who are on we have the rental registry right now. I think a third of people who should sign up.
Yes.
So is the 500 composed of the third who have previously signed up, or is it composed of the 2/3 who haven't previously signed up?
The 500 was a batch of, I think it was around 1,000 that was sent out in June. The letters were sent in July of 2018. So, and then there was kind of a pause because I got hired. We're trying to get the thing up and running. We knew all along that's where we were going to start. After this batch is done, then they're focusing on those that have never registered before.
So the initial 500 batch
I think
is
it's a mix.
It's just like it's almost like a geographic mix or something. It's
Yeah.
not based on that status. It's something different.
Ken might be better able to answer that.
Good afternoon, councilors. Ken Towsley, Director of Codes. The initial 1,000 was taken from 3 or 4 neighborhoods down in Brighton, Elmwood area, and that is a mixture of those who never applied, those who have applied before, and we started with that group strategically, higher poverty rates down there. And then of that 1,000, we received approximately 400 applications. Inspections were performed. The remaining 600, combination of non-applicants, owner-occupieds, Syracuse Housing Authority properties, which are exempt from it, religious, family-based exemptions, and that brought us down to approximately 440 properties who did not apply, and that's the group that we're ticketing.
Thank you.
And again, I think it's important to note that the tickets are going to be entirely at the discretion of codes. Right now, obviously, we're having a lot of communication as we get up and running, you know, to decide to start with the rental registry because they're the kind of, it's a 1 violation to 1 ticket. So they're the easiest to roll out. They're the lowest ticket amount as far as capabilities for code staff, my staff, treasury, and processing with an IPS. They were the easiest ones. But, you know, once we're fully up and running, it'll be completely at code's discretion which properties they're ticketing and how they're ticketing them. We will just process and adjudicate them.
I think you speak with a lot of intention, and when you say we'll start with the rental registry, I think maybe you start, we're targeting the violations of rental registry, right? And then, because when I hear you say we're going to start with the rental registry, I often think you're targeting the people who signed up.
Yeah.
And I think
my
that's
apologies.
the biggest fear. It's like we're targeting the people.
No, it'd be those that are non-compliant.
Which is the entire point. But I'm always worried that somehow we will end up doing it backwards, and we will be, oh, we have this list of people. Let's go check their houses first. And I think
they would still have to have the notice of violation issued by codes for not complying with the registration. So again, the codes process doesn't change. So that whatever the violation is, that process has to happen first. And then if the property owner is not compliant by the comply by date, then codes has the ability to issue a ticket.
Okay. Thank you. I'll open it to broadly for questions. Also, Lovejoy Grinnell.
Thank you. First, I think the council predating me deserves credit for seeing this as an important part of this process and for initiating this program, especially Councilor Nicoletti. I wanted to say I have seen your presentations at two TNT meetings. I know you've done them other places as well, and they're great it's a great presentation, and I think you're doing a lot in terms of education of the public. I think the power of the BAA to affect real change, real tangible change for tenants, and also on quality of life issues for all residents in the city is huge. So, so my question is, how does the salary of the chief administrative law judge compare with that of other similarly situated judges across the state doing a similarly constructed program? And how does it compare to state administrative law judges? Because I see that number and it seems low. As a, I don't know that much about it, but do you know anything about how that compares with either of those groups?
As far as the other BAAs or city-run administrative bureaus, I'm not sure. When I viewed those, I didn't ask to look at their budgets or whatnot. A lot of the other bureaus in the city or in other cities are operating on a grander scale than ours. A lot of them have the parking rolled in. A lot of them do ticketing for other nuisances. But as far as state administrative adjudicative agencies, I know state administrative law judges, not factoring in whether they're a director or not, start at a higher pay rate. I think most of them start, and then they have the graduated pay schedule. So I think it's $90,000 to $100,000 for a lot of them, and then you go up within 5 years. You can, get to 125, 150. I don't know the exact numbers. I just, I reached out. I have a lot of former colleagues that I've worked with that are administrative law judges in different state agencies that start at the higher rate and then have the escalating schedule. So I think with many city employees, it's much lower when you compare it to a state level.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you mentioned that, just curious in a general sense, you mentioned that there's only a 10% appeal as compared to, as you found in other municipalities. Do you know offhand the results from other municipalities, such as, what the success rate is of BAAs? Like, do the bulk of people plead guilty or just comply, or do you know any other statistics that would be relevant to success rates with similar municipalities?
Sure. I think it's a little different in all of the cities. As most of us are aware, Rochester has been operating theirs for years. So it's more, I think they're generating much higher compliance because people kind of know that this is the pipeline. And I also don't believe that they use, what we use as a city or state Supreme Housing Court anymore. Everything kind of goes through the BAA. Whereas Buffalo and Yonkers, I'm not sure. When I observed hearings and the appeals panel, in Buffalo and Rochester, there were definitely still many hearings on that they're having, and the outcomes were different for each one. I asked for statistics from each of them, but as they're all very busy, I kind of got bits of, and pieces of information over the past couple of months, so I don't have specifics on how things are worked. Observing their appeals panel, I know that they do have a relatively low appeal rate, so most people are at least accepting the underlying decision issued at the hearing, whether that was upholding the fine amount on the original ticket, reducing or waiving it based on the violation and what the ALJ determined based on the evidence and the facts at the hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
When you said you've been experiencing a higher, somewhat positive response than expected thus far, was that accurate to what you said?
I think that was regarding the batch. I think Ken said it's down to 440 properties. That there has been, I think it's fair to say, more than the 30% compliance when you're looking at just those numbers. For example, the first batch hit their comply by date, I believe, on April 5th. And then, like I said, we're a little delayed getting started because of IPS issues. And, over the past week, they keep trickling in, the applications keep trickling in, so the number of tickets that eventually will be generated keeps going down. So I don't know if that's, again, because of the language that was added to the form or in connection with the postcards that were mailed out, notifying. I will say we've been getting a lot of calls, both Code's office and my office, about the postcards. Hey, what is this? So people are calling both offices, because both numbers are on the card, asking what it means, and we direct them. If you have outstanding code violations, this is Code's number, you should follow up with them.
Gotcha. And another thing you mentioned was 1,200 being the maximum cap on ticketing. Now, is that initial ticketing?
No.
Or that's like, if they come back, they violate, or they don't comply by the first ticket, 1,200 is the max that they can get to?
1,200 is the max. So in the fine and penalty schedules in the Syracuse Property Conservation Code, so that's the only place you can find it. It's not in the local law. I don't know why it was done that way. That predates me. But, the initial fines for first tickets, the highest amount is $300.
Okay.
Okay, so, and then the highest amount for subsequent tickets is $600, and that only hits on second ticket for zoning or a third ticket for general property maintenance. And then if they default, they don't plea within that 30 days, that's when it would get to the 1,200.
Okay.
So as it's written right now, the ordinance, that's as high as a ticket could go. And the judge doesn't have the capability of adding more on. The judge could reduce or waive that amount, but they can't exceed that amount.
And how does this apply to multi-unit dwellings? Is that per dwelling, per violation?
It'd be per violation. So the tickets are going to be one violation per ticket.
Right.
But if an inspector goes in, they can issue multiple tickets with a violation. So you could have, a property with 10 or more violations, which would generate 10 or more tickets, each with, the associated fine.
Yeah.
The way, and we're still working through our process on that, but the way that we're doing it, that would be bundled with one inspector affidavit referencing each violation. It would be served as a packet, and they could plead differently to each violation if they so choose. But then whatever ones they're requesting a hearing, we would also bundle those hearings together, and the ordinance specifically permits us to group those hearings.
Great. Thank you for that information.
You're the only one safe. I have a question. This may be for Ken. Hi, Ken. So usually, besides the yearly inspections, most violations are brought up they're complaint driven, correct? So is this going to have like an effect where we're going to be targeting?
No,
homes?
we will not target.
Okay.
We're going to treat everything the same. No process is changing. We will still take the tenant complaints. We'll still have the same process, reaching out to landlords. If we don't have any communication with them, we will perform inspections, we'll write up violations, and we'll treat it as we go forward. The difference now is, instead of an extended period of time referring to the law department, we cut that time down to where if we're getting no compliance, we can refer to the BAA in a quicker fashion.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, just to follow up on that, the one of the goals citywide is that right now you have a large number of violations that just sit dormant. There's no enforcement mechanism. So again, months down the line, but once we're at that point, every new violation should either go through the BAA or go through the law department. So there shouldn't be no enforcement mechanism for a large majority of them. It'll take us a while to get there and to work through backlogs, and we'll have to see what handling that volume looks like, but that's the goal.
Okay, thank you.
I often ask people, in the budget process, talking about multi-year planning, and since you're an emergent bureau, how do you currently have a multi-year plan for how you see the growth? Like, you've grown over the last year, right? You just got hired, you've gotten your staff, your office. So does that need to continue to grow as we move forward, or like at what? Yeah. How do you see the growth moving forward?
Sure, I think a lot of that depends on volume. So again, how many tickets is Codes generating? Of those tickets, how many property owners are requesting hearings? Right now, we have the 4 part-time administrative law judges. So myself will be doing a large majority of the hearings. I'll have the part-time to do the hearings, and I'll have 1 appeals panel. The ordinance itself allows for up to 7. So we have a little leeway there. I think we need to see what the capacity looks like. The ordinance says that the appeals panel can't regularly hear the underlying hearings, and no one who heard the underlying hearing can poll up. So whereas parking, Dave explained, there's this pool of hearing examiners. They self-poll up and form their own appeals panel as long as they didn't hear the underlying hearing. Ours is a little different, that the appeals panel has to be separate. Well, what if somebody's kid is sick, or an emergency comes up, they get stuck at their real job, because this is just extremely part-time for the appeals panel. In instances, myself or the other hearing administrative law judge could pull up, but not the one that sat on the underlying hearing. So, and I think it's a volume and capacity thing we'll have to see. We're starting with 1 paralegal, and I think we have to see how it affects us and all other departments, right? It's a big additional workload to Ken's department, to his inspectors, his and clerks, to Martha. Her clerks are processing all of the payments. So it really affects a lot of other departments as well. So I think the first year, once we're fully up and running and we see how that impacts not only the BAA but all of those other departments, we'll have to constantly reevaluate, what's working, what's an even and fair distribution of the workload, to get to our end goal, to be able to process these tickets, because we don't want to fall back into, hey, there's a huge backlog because, we don't have the manpower, or Codes doesn't have the manpower. And I think it's important to point out that, last year we were fully subsidized by CITA. This year we're largely subsidized by CITA, and next year we're hopeful we'll be partially subsidized by CITA. Obviously, as we're ramping up, the revenue will ramp up, but, until we're a couple years out, we're not going to know what the revenue that's being generated and what the budget looks like without any subsidy by CITA.
So I appreciate all that you share, right? Like when you talk about your the number of citations that are in the budget, you very clearly understand what goes into that and the assumptions behind it and where it might change. And the way you're thinking about it sounds exactly right, and it sounds like thinking that's often absent from a lot of the budgeting. So I think that's a huge opportunity for you to continue thinking that way as you think about what you really need and what assumptions will drive the staffing levels, to identify the points at which you do need to hire or expand, and how that relates to your output. So for instance, you kind of estimate the number of violations that, well, you're saying we're going to target this many homes, and it depends on the rate of compliance, right? So if the rate is higher the first year because people are questioning the authority or something, then it becomes the number of hearings will be this much, and then you've got this demand, so to speak, for hearings, and then you have on the other, it's all supply demand for your own ability to staff it. So you've got this supply of these 4 part-time judges which have this many hours, and there's probably some multiplier that makes it difficult to schedule given that they're part-time. So there's going to be times they're unavailable, or you can't be the same person twice, or whatever it is, that kind of inefficiency thing. So I think the way you're describing it, you seem to really understand it. I would try to articulate that, if to nobody else, to yourself, so that when you get to the point where you can say, look, hey, the rate I planned based on this rate of compliance, the compliance rate is lower, so we actually are going to have more hearings, and it's really important that we actually process these quickly and timely in the first days, so that people get a clear signal that this is real, so that the compliance rate will go up, and in the long run, hopefully there'll be fewer hearings, or whatever that may be. But I think you would do that really well, and you probably benefit by doing it now, so that when you could get to the permanent plateau. So
absolutely. And MBD has a codes planner, Michelle Sapansky, that's been building out IPS for us, and we've talked extensively about reports She's been building in those reports to the best of her ability in there so that we can pull all that information. And then my paralegals also built out internal reporting in Excel just as a backup, so we can see those things. So especially at the beginning, we'll be tracking all of the tickets to see how they go and what happens, you know, and again, touching base with the other departments to see what their workloads look like.
And then I would like you, I don't know if you look at this, but as a relative outsider, and having just looked at the Parking Violations Bureau, which is a established bureau, right? So like they're not in these states of change, but they raised 2.8 million for the 800,000 that they are doing. So they're whatever $3 or $4 for every dollar that's in the office, which makes sense. So like when I just look, and I think in the emergent years, you're not going to be at that rate at all, right? But even having that rate in mind, so like, oh, in the beginning, we're going to actually be spending more running the office than we'll collect. And then we would expect to get to a 1-to-1 ratio within, I don't know, 2 to 3 years. And then like a 2-to-1 ratio of like net dollars to what we're spending by, I don't know, year 4 or something to that effect. I think, because when, yeah, it's in our interest for you to succeed. And I believe that you're going to make it successful. So just the more you can advocate how your success is in our interest, I think.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think the goal is to be generating that revenue. I do think it's different than parking in that, you know, if you talk to Ken, he'll say the goal from his end is compliance on the front end. So you don't want them ever to get to a ticket. So with these rental registries, with the 30% and change compliance rate, after you've ticketed them and show them, hey, you know, someone's enforcing this. This has never been enforced before, so why would I pay the $150 and apply? Well, now you're going to keep getting fined, and it'll add to that $150 until you apply. At some point, you know, not all of them, obviously, but some of them are going to catch on and start applying. So then that will never get to the point of a ticket. So it should reduce the number of violations.
Reduce. I totally give you
Yeah,
that.
on
'Cause, like,
codes end.
again, I know parking and housing are different, but I assume somebody could say, well, the point is we're going to get to a point where people don't violate parking norms, and we might put ourselves out of business. But that's not reality. Reality is there's always some segment of the population that just doesn't do what they're supposed to, and hopefully they get a ticket so that we minimize that segment of the population. And I think there will be that element in housing no matter what. So there will be like a permanent baseline moving forward. What level it is, I agree we don't yet know, but. Oh, we're over. Any other questions? Sorry. Wow. Yeah, probably. Glad you